originally grew wild all across the Americas, the New World, and eons ago, the Indians probably first encountered its effects by accident, probably while using it to fuel their fires. The plant took on an important ritual ceremonial role in Native American culture. For example, the Mayan priests cultivated tobacco and considered it sacred. And as tobacco spread throughout the New World, it was used for religious and medicinal purposes. Besides being smoked in massive cigars and pipes, it was also chewed, used in poultices, and even used in enemas. Native Americans have many different legends and folk tales concerning the sacred plant's origins. But tobacco is just another one of the many fruits of the earth with which Indians have long felt a spiritual/supernatural connection. Now, they would make offerings of tobacco in order to renew the relationship between the spirits and humanity. This tobacco was far more potent than the varieties cultivated commercially today. The plant's broad leaves would not only be smoked, but would also be dried to a dull green, then crumbled in sacred places and open fires. Now, burned in the sacred pipe, the tobacco smoke would carry the words and thoughts of the people to the Great Spirit. Now, long before the Europeans set foot on the New World, the plant spread northward from its origins in South America through Mexico and the American desert, all the way up to the latitudes of the Hudson Bay, and would spread eastward across the plains and mountains to the Atlantic coast. Now, Columbus, upon his arrival in the New World, was given tobacco, a cigar, by the natives. On his very first day in the Americas, the explorer navigator, not knowing what to do with it, simply threw it away. Soon Columbus's men observed the natives puffing on big cigars, which the Spaniards described as thinking smoke. Now, Rodrigo de Jerez has the distinction of becoming the first European to develop the tobacco habit. But upon his return to Spain, his neighbors were terrified. They freaked out to see smoke pouring from his head. Convinced that he was in league with the devil, the Inquisition, Spanish Inquisition, imprisoned him for 7 years. Now, as the Spanish conquistadors expanded their New World empire, more and more of them took up smoking, and they soon learned of its addictive nature. Spanish priests reported that although they condemned tobacco in their homilies, their sermons, the men found it virtually impossible to give up. Spanish mariners returning home soon spread the plant all over Europe. And by the early 1500s, cigars, from the Mayan word sicar, were fashionable among the Spanish nobility and landed gentry. The poor soon developed a habit of their own, rolling the cast-off remains of discarded butts in paper to make mini cigars or cigarillos. By the mid-16th century, 1550 or so, tobacco was being grown on a small scale in several European countries, and the plant was touted as a cure for numerous ailments. 'Tis a remedy most marvelous. Now, circa 1566, Jean Nicot, the French ambassador, sent snuff to Catherine de' Medici, who quickly became hooked and dubbed tobacco the Queen's herb. Nicot also gave his name to both the plant's genus, Nicotiana, and its primary psychoactive component, nicotine. Now, around this time, shipwrecked Portuguese sailors became the first Europeans and the first smokers to set foot in Japan. Many more followed in the next 50 years, spreading the tobacco habit. The ruling shoguns, however, tried to stop it, but Japanese smokers ignored the increasingly severe sanctions, including confiscation of property and imprisonment. Finally, in 1625, the shoguns bowed to the inevitable and allowed tobacco cultivation. Now, as the Spanish and Portuguese continued to explore the globe, they planted tobacco along the way in order to fend off the pangs of nicotine withdrawal. Locals soon discovered the addictive nature of the plant and were, well, far easier to subjugate. Do what we say, and we'll give you cigarettes. Now, by the early 17th century, Spanish and Portuguese trading posts, complete with tobacco farms, were in place on all major sea routes. The plant had literally taken root all over the world. Not everyone was exactly thrilled with this. For example, the Persian Shah Sefi ordered molten lead poured down the throats of those practicing this blasphemous smoking habit. And tobacco use was also punishable by death in 17th century Russia and China. These early bans on tobacco were made on moral, religious, and fiscal grounds. But health concerns began to pop up. For example, this is around 1670 or so. An English doctor provided early medical evidence of the link to cancer, noting a massive increase in nasal cancer among snuff users. A single batch of tobacco seeds would play a pivotal role in the growth of the British American colonies and the birth of the United States. Now, while Spain and Portugal spent much of the 16th century exploiting the natural resources of their New World empires, including, of course, tobacco, England was unable to establish a successful settlement in the vast area of North America. One notable failure was Roanoke Island, which was established in 1587 under Governor John White. White soon went back to England seeking supplies, but England's ongoing clash with Spain prevented him from returning. White makes it back in 1590 or so, only to find that the colony had vanished, leaving only a mysterious word, Croatoan, carved on a tree. While he did bring some tobacco seeds to England for the colony sponsor, White, when he was in London, he brought back seeds for Sir Walter Raleigh, who experimented with their cultivation. Raleigh had been turned on to tobacco a few years earlier by the mariner Sir Francis Drake. As a favorite of Queen Elizabeth, Raleigh popularized smoking among the nobility and courtiers. Raleigh soon fell out of favor, as did tobacco. For example, in 1604, King James I even wrote about the plant, calling it loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, dangerous to the lungs, and generally akin to the fires of hell. Naturally, the king's censure failed to stem the public's use of tobacco, but England's climate was ill-suited to produce bountiful harvests of the sweet leaf. Growing demand caused the limited supply of tobacco to soar in price, and the plant was traded for silver, pound for pound. Some noblemen bankrupted themselves in pursuit of a smoke, and even the poor became addicted, spending the little money that they had for food in order to buy another pipeful. Meanwhile, back in Jamestown, Virginia, England's only New World settlement, conditions were dire, dire indeed. Of the 500 settlers, only 60 survived the cruel, frigid winter of 1609/1610, and many had to resort to cannibalism, eating the bodies of the dead in order to stay alive. In 1612, the turning point came when John Rolfe, who would later marry Pocahontas, somehow managed to acquire seeds from tobacco that was grown in Spanish territory. And Jamestown's first tobacco harvest was a big, big hit in England. Sensing that they had found their economic salvation, the colonists concentrated on, the labor-intensive task of cultivating the plants, allowing much of the Jamestown community, including the church and the stockade, to virtually fall apart. But with 700 tobacco shops in London eager for product, their decision paid off, and by 1618, the Jamestown harvest yielded over 20,000 pounds of the sweet leaf. The following year, 1619, the Jamestown colonists took a horrendous step to increase tobacco production. They purchased their first African slaves. King James urged the colonists to switch to other products, but as the tax on tobacco became the crown's largest source of revenue, the monarch, the king, did not force the issue. Now, 10 years later, Jamestown's